The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We now have a preliminary agreement between the P5+1 nations and Iran on Iran's nuclear weapons program. The P5+1 are, as the number suggests, 6 countries. You first have the P5, which are the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Those are China, France, Russia, the UK, and the US. +1 refers to Germany. So what is in this deal? It's preliminary, which means it doesn't encompass everything. Some specific issues won't be determined until June. It addresses that Iran has agreed to cut the number of operating centrifuges that it has by about 2/3 to 5,060. It has to cut its current stockpile of low enriched uranium from around 10,000 kilograms to just 300 for 15 years. And Iran agrees not to enrich uranium to over 3.67% for at least 15 years. In exchange, significant economic sanctions would be removed against Iran. An American commentary or description of the deal also said that inspections could happen, quote, anywhere in the country, and that any suspicious sites or suspicious allegations with regard to nuclear programs, can be investigated. The details of that have not exactly been made public, so we'll see what happens there. The main goal here is to keep Iran more than a year away from a nuclear weapon. So, Lewis, presumably the experts, the negotiators, focusing all of the specific requirements around if Iran does this, we know they'll be at least a year away from a nuclear weapon.
That's the plan, but it seems to me that it would be impossible to monitor the entire country for what would be a violation of this. I mean, can we really trust this?
There's 2 views on that, right? There's one view, which is the view that is kind of the more reactionary view, which is who knows what Iran is going to do. If we ease sanctions, this is going to make it much easier for them to bolster their economy in a way that will allow more nuanced ways of hiding what they are doing. And the other view, which to me seems like the more pragmatic view, is not the one of who cares what Iran does. They should have nuclear weapons. That's not the side I'm on. I'm more on the pragmatic side, and I've talked to former TV director and my brother Natan Pakman, who's studying in Israel right now, and even the consensus there amongst the reasonable people seems to be, if you consider the double agents and the spies that obviously are in Iran, if you consider the satellite experts, if you consider everything that we can now gather from satellite imagery and intelligence reports, there are going to be ways to figure out if Iran is moving forward on this. And at least this accord gets them officially agreeing to do something so that if they don't, then we can say it's now an on-paper violation and there can be real consequences.
Agreed. And when it comes to foreign relations, does the lifting of these sanctions or relaxing of these sanctions, will this improve relations with Iran in general? Are we still going to hear death to America all the time?
I don't know. I mean, the young people in Iran who have no interest whatsoever in nuclear weapons or in bombing other countries, but they do have an interest in living a more cosmopolitan and enriching life, they're obviously thrilled because of the possibility of decreased sanctions. So I think that it's really going to come down to the president's administration and to the Ayatollah and the religious regime to see what it is that happens. I also think that there was some, not panic, but urgency for President Obama to get something done as he nears the end of his presidency, to at least have something on paper done. And the reality is that this also does add to another accomplishment to what is actually a growing list of non-insignificant accomplishments for President Obama. Aside from all the things that he has done that we disagree with, we've got a longer and longer list of pragmatic accomplishments here.
Right. I think we could still agree, though, that for every accomplishment, there is probably at least one thing that we think is pretty terrible.
No question about it. Absolutely. And, incrementalism and if this is a good thing, if this is better than having nothing, then we should support it. And then we can explore. And there are groups that have serious concerns about this agreement. Once we see the final agreement, it seems like it'll be June, we will do a full analysis, and we've got a bunch of interviews planned around this. Rand Paul will make a formal announcement tomorrow that he is running for president as a Republican in 2016. Here's a few seconds from a video that he put out in advance of the announcement.
There's probably few candidates for 2016 that are more interesting than Rand Paul.
Rand Paul has been the most consistently principled person talking about issues.
The senator for Kentucky might just be the candidate who ends up winning this thing.
I can't really do more than a few seconds before I start to get nauseous, but that at least gives you an idea of what he put out. This will make two candidates so far, officially on the Republican side, Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. Both would be huge dangers to this country. Both would be obvious deviants, and they would stand no chance at being elected in other countries at our level of development. But for some reason, Lewis, these are considered legitimate candidates in the U.S.
They are. I think we'd both rather have Rand Paul as president than Ted Cruz. I don't know. I guess that's just my opinion. I can't speak for you. But, in the grand scheme of things, he's not as much of a lunatic as a lot of the people we're looking at here. For
right.
the Republican
Rand Paul
Party.
is not the craziest person currently running for president, but that's certainly close. And remember, Rand Paul recently failing miserably at explaining the First Amendment in spite of the fact that he is the freedom and liberty guy. He said the First Amendment says keep government out of religion, but not religion out of government. Actually, it says exactly that. And we'll have an interview later today with an expert on the First Amendment. Rand Paul opposing net neutrality, saying he's heard that vaccines cause severe mental disorders sometimes. Then he had to backtrack on that one. He plagiarized speeches from Wikipedia and movie scripts. And his insane, irrational, non-science position on Ebola was certainly a red flag. The list goes on and on. But, Lewis, I guess he does support national medical marijuana.
He seems to. He could backtrack on that at any time when appealing to the religious right, which he has to do.
Does Rand Paul have a shot at being the Republican nominee? He did win the CPAC straw poll.
I really don't think he does. I just don't see enough money behind him to get the job done.
Rand Paul will not be the Republican nominee for president. And I've already said Ted Cruz will not be the Republican nominee for president. We do not yet know who has a shot. None of the current official candidates have a shot. I also was wondering about Chris Christie. It looked for a long time that Republican New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was definitely not going to run in the Republican primary for 2016 because of embarrassment after embarrassment as governor, the huge corruption issues, the big fees and a huge salary for his wife's employer. He wanted mandatory Ebola quarantines. He seems to have lied multiple times about Bridgegate, where lanes of the George Washington Bridge were shut down as political retribution. He said he had never heard of it, but an aide said, actually, I personally told him about Bridgegate. It seemed, Lewis, I thought that there was no chance Christie was still thinking about running.
Well, the office of the president sounds really appealing, I guess, if you think that, you could stir up some support. I don't think he has a shot, but I hope he runs.
Yeah, and it seems like he's still thinking about it. He's going to do a campaign-style trip through New Hampshire, one of the early primary states. He's going to do all sorts of speeches and events, private gatherings, public retail stops, blah, blah, blah. They're calling it the Tell It Like It Is town hall tour. Honestly, the only thing I've ever enjoyed hearing Chris Christie tell like it is when he tells people that are yelling or heckling just to sit down and shut up. Beyond that, I've never heard him say anything remotely compelling with regard to politics.
Yeah, or really honest, but I think he really meant what he was saying, and it was truthful when he yelled at those people.
According to some campaign or Christie confidants, he is still very, very interested. This could get very interesting. So far, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, potentially Chris Christie, and we have to talk about our buddy Jeb Bush as well. Jeb Bush, according to the New York Times report today, possible 2016 candidate. This is just so funny. He listed himself as Hispanic on his 2009 voter registration form. You know, Louis, I am officially Hispanic. Whatever it means to be officially Hispanic, I've been told I'm officially Hispanic, even though I am of Eastern European Jewish ethnicity. I was born in Argentina. I was raised in a Hispanic culture. So I am considered Hispanic. But a lot of people tell me, you know, David, you learned English early enough, and because of your skin color, you present as someone who's just a white American. And I understand that, right? I understand that because I was lucky enough to learn English at an early enough age, I don't have an accent with most words. What's Jeb Bush's explanation, right? I mean, he speaks Spanish. That certainly doesn't make you Hispanic. His wife is Hispanic. She's from Mexico. That certainly doesn't make you Hispanic. But Jeb Bush selecting Hispanic on a voter registration form.
Either he was trying to make a point or he was lying to get more votes. I'm not sure which one it is, but if you're trying to make a point,
but
either
what
leave
point
that,
would it be?
I don't know, that Hispanic, white, black, that it's all the same, that it makes no difference. I mean,
so allow me if I can. Yeah. What you're suggesting as a thought experiment, I understand that you're not saying this, is that Jeb Bush feels really strongly about race and ethnicity as a social construct, and he decides to express that by checking off Hispanic on his 2009 voter registration form.
Just an idea.
Yeah.
because if that's not it, then either he's very confused and thinks he is Hispanic or he's a liar.
A Bush spokeswoman was asked for an explanation. She could offer none. It's hard to imagine it's a mistake. And at the same time, it's hard to imagine what he had to gain by putting down Hispanic. So this just doesn't make sense. I wonder if Marco Rubio, if he runs, could say he was really offended when Jeb Bush checked off Hispanic because it kind of devalues Marco Rubio's actual story of being Hispanic.
I think this is probably exactly the type of thing we'll see come up in the primaries, and I hope it does.
We're not even at the beginning of the Republican primary, and it's already one of the funniest Republican primaries that I can remember covering. So I'm excited. Tweet me about this, twitter.com/dpakman. We'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Huge news today about the David Pakman Show membership program, which is the #1 funding source for our show. Today's new member of the day is Kevin Crivelli. And Kevin, you're so lucky because today we have a huge membership announcement. For years, people have been saying, David, I want to be a member, but I don't want to use PayPal. I don't want to use Amazon payments. We have finally, with the support of the Salerno Family Trust and Greg Stevens, revamped the entire David Pakman Show website, most importantly, the membership program. The membership program now does not require PayPal or Amazon. You can go right to our website, davidpakman.com/membership, and sign up. Instant activation, no more waiting for us to activate your account. It happens instantly. The mobile David Pakman Show website is now up and running for Android and iOS devices. You can also become a member on your mobile device, which before was very complicated to do. No PayPal, no Amazon, instant activation, davidpakman.com/membership. And because we're launching this new thing, Louis, we're offering a coupon code, which is yet another thing that we can do now that we couldn't do before. April half, all one word, April half. You put that coupon code in when you're checking out for membership. It gives you half off your first payment. Now, if I'm thinking of this, if I get a $6 a month membership and I use the code, I save $3 for my first month. If I get the $60 yearly membership and use the code, I save $30. I get a 1-year membership for less than $3 per month. That's what I would be doing with the code April half, Louis. I don't know about you.
It sounds like a good plan. Yeah, why not? Save as much money as possible.
Louis sounds so excited. I can tell, Louis. It's incredible how excited you are about this. So yes, the new membership portal is up. please, if you've been holding off because you don't want to use PayPal or Amazon, this is the time. And use coupon code APRIL1/2 to save 50% off of your first payment. That's going on for the next week. You can also support our show by using the Amazon banner at davidpakman.com. If you ever shop at Amazon, click the Amazon banner on the right side of davidpakman.com, bookmark it, and use it whenever you shop. I'm really glad that a lot of people have been ordering Johan Hari's book. We interviewed Johan Hari about the war on drugs last week. His book is Chasing the Scream, the first and last days of the war on drugs. Huge positive response to the interview, Lewis. You were on vacation that day. I would recommend, Lewis, if you haven't already, that you check out that interview.
Yeah, it's on the list, David. There's a long list.
And a ton of people ordering Breaking Bad DVDs over the last week. I can hypothesize, Lewis, that the end of Better Call Saul season 1 is making people say, oh man, I want something else that's good, and I don't want to wait until Better Call Saul season 2. That's just my thought on why we're seeing so many Breaking Bad orders in the last few days.
That could be, or it could be that perhaps some people have been interested in Better Call Saul but have not seen Breaking Bad and would like to see that side of the story.
Remember to use that Amazon banner at davidpakman.com to support us with any Amazon shopping that you do. Well, bigots decided to support bigotry, donated $842,000 to that anti-gay pizza shop, Memories Pizza in Walkerton, Indiana. This entire thing started because the owners of Memories Pizza, after the passage of the anti-gay so-called religious freedom bill in Indiana, said, we would not cater a gay wedding. It ignored the realities that very few gay weddings would want pizza as catering. That still seems to be lost on them, but that's okay. And this triggered a backlash, in part from those who say, see, look, there are businesses that want to discriminate against LGBT individuals, and now they're legally able to do so. But it also caused a counter backlash. The bigots came out in force, donating piles of money to this pizza shop, which, quite frankly, according to the reviews I've seen, doesn't really have very good pizza, donating to support bigotry. Have they won, Lewis?
Well, I guess if you ask them, they're donating to support freedom of religion.
Of course.
Have they won? No. I don't think they've won. How do you measure that, though?
Well, here's what I'm thinking. The bigots who are willing to support, even if they're supporting freedom of religion, an anti-gay statement was still one that did not turn them off enough not to donate to an anti-gay pizza shop. If they really want to see their dollars work for them in an anti-gay way, they would be way better off donating to the hate groups and the conservative legal groups that are trying to push more religious freedom bills, to push more bans on same-sex marriage, etc. I actually think this is $842,000 that is just going to allow one bigoted family to now live off of this cash, regardless of how terrible their pizza is. It's not really going to help push anti-gay legislation. I see this as $842,000 that has now been redirected away from actual groups working on anti-gay legislation.
Mm-hmm. Unless they decide to now retire from the pizza industry.
And become anti-gay activists.
Exactly. So we could see that happening. But it's interesting, if we've seen situations like this where a business is, there's a debate around something like this. And if you are the first business in the spotlight to deal with this, that's where the money is. And we've seen this happen before. Making
an anti-gay public statement is the best financial decision that they've ever made for this pizza shop. The most telling thing about all of this to me is that these so-called Christians concerned with religious freedom are willing to donate hundreds of thousands of dollars to an anti-gay pizza shop than people who are actually needy.
That is a good point. Maybe they're doing both. We can't say with certitude, but I don't see how this money is helping the world.
Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton showed up on CNN to talk about Indiana's and Arkansas's so-called religious freedom laws. I don't know exactly what point he was trying to make, but he said that gay people in those states should just get some perspective and realize that at least they're not being hanged to death. I can't possibly understand what point he was trying to make. Let's take a listen.
Get your quick reaction to what's going on in your home state of Arkansas. Very different subject. The governor, Asa Hutchinson, as you well know, decided he wasn't going to sign into law this religious freedom bill, in part based on what's going on in Indiana right now. Your reaction?
Well, Wolf, in Arkansas, we believe in religious freedom. That's one reason why our
everybody believes in religious freedom.
That's one reason why our
But the question is the discrimination, potential discrimination against gay Americans.
The Religious Freedom Restoration Act was signed by former Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton in his first year in office. These laws are modeled on that, and a lot of the concerns about discrimination haven't been borne to bear over the last 20 years. But I also think it's important that we have a sense of perspective about our priorities. In Iran, they hang you for the crime of being gay.
So we need perspective, Lewis, right? In the U.S., we're creating law that allows businesses to turn away gays from their places of business based on sexual orientation. Be glad, I guess, that you're not in Iran where you could be killed for being gay.
What he's saying is that as long as we are doing, as long as we're not killing you, you should just deal with whatever discrimination and persecution and horrible treatment you get in this country. And I think he definitely planned this, because as soon as he says that, be glad you're not in Iran, he starts talking about the nuke deal, deflecting. Obviously, he does not want to talk about this.
Isn't it hilarious, though, how when other countries do things better than us, be it education or social services, infant mortality rates or vaccination rates, whatever, right? We hear from these right-wingers, this is the U.S., this country is different, we have different standards, who cares what anybody else is doing? It's useless to look at other countries. When you want to pass a law that allows discriminating against gays, he says, hey, let's look at how much worse things are in other countries, countries we would never even think of comparing ourselves to for any other reason. Look at Iran, for example. It's just this hilarious contradiction.
Yeah, I don't think he would use this argument in other places, like if we up the tax on the rich, on the 1%, saying, hey, look at France, over there, just be glad you're not there. They could tax you up to 90% of your income. I don't think he would make that argument.
They would never make that argument when you point out other countries that have higher taxes. They would say, well, these taxes, we have to base our taxes on what makes sense here. And the other thing is for everybody like Tom Cotton, who is saying this really isn't that bad. It's just discriminating at places at businesses, just saying we don't want your business. It's no big deal. When this becomes the norm, the bigots can work on the next thing. Maybe no gay kids in public schools, or maybe no children of gay parents in public schools, or maybe no gays in elected office. I'm jumping ahead a few steps. We don't want to jump to slippery slopes when they really don't exist. But when you have any form of legal discrimination, that form of legal discrimination is now used as a new baseline to push the next level of legal discrimination. We know this from history, so we shouldn't just write this off as, listen, Iran is crazy. We're doing something that's no big deal.
We know damn well that if the religious right in this country, the religious zealots in this country had their way, we would be treating gays exactly the way they're treated in Iran.
They would be doing way more if they could just get away with it. No question about it. So let's not forget that. Next, the First Amendment, misused and destroyed by constitutional fetishists when it's convenient for them. Burt Newborn will join us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Burt Newborn, who is professor of civil liberties at NYU Law School, former legal director of the ACLU, and also author of the book Madison's Music on reading the First Amendment. The First Amendment is, if you're at all discussing politics in 2015, so relevant, and you've been looking very closely at what the First Amendment actually says. It's not clear that everybody is doing that recently. So let's start there. What does the First Amendment say? What doesn't it say also?
Well, in fact, the First Amendment consists of 45 words. Nobody ever, and including the current Supreme Court, ever tries to read all 45 words at once. What they do is they pluck a couple of words out of the text, like the Free Speech Clause, which is 10 words, or the Press Clause, or the Petition Clause, or the Establishment Clause, and they read them as though they were self-contained documents, and they hold a couple of words in their hands, and they think that they're getting the full meaning of the text. I'm urging people to remember that the text is 45 words long. It's not just a couple of words long. And you would never read a poem by tearing a couple of words out and thinking you were getting the poem. You would never listen to a great piece of music by listening to a couple of notes and thinking you were getting the whole piece of music. And I think we've made a terrible mistake by cannibalizing the First Amendment into a kind of several different pieces of turf that don't seem to have any connection with the rest. And I urge people to read the whole amendment. And if you read the whole amendment, there's a remarkable story there.
And tell us about, now that you have put so much time into looking at those 45 words and looking at the history of those 45 words, how should the for the layperson, what's the accurate understanding of the First Amendment?
Yeah, the important thing in my book, I mean, to the extent the book has anything important at all, it's that lay people can read the First Amendment just as well as judges. There's no magic in that text. There's no special license that lawyers have to know what the true meaning of the First Amendment is. The words are there for us all to read. And the important thing to remember is that the First Amendment is made up of 6 ideas. It's the only time in our cultural history that those 6 ideas have ever been listed in a single document. When Madison was working on the First Amendment, he had 42 documents that he was looking at, 42 source documents that he was looking at, ranging from the Magna Carta way back in 1215 through the English Bills of Rights, through the colonial charters, through the Revolutionary Bills of Rights. None of them had anything like this remarkable organization. And this is what Madison did. He starts it with the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, 2 clauses. Establishment Clause is freedom from religion. You've got to remember that the first thing in the First Amendment is freedom from religion. It prevents people from shoving their religion down your throat. Secondly, free exercise of religion, the ability to exercise your religion free from government compulsion. Now, to put the two of them together, and what Madison was working on was conscience, freedom of conscience. He wanted a 3rd clause that would protect secular conscience. He couldn't get it through the Senate in 1789, but the Supreme Court has put it back in through a kind of word magic. So when we look at the first 2 clauses now, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, we have freedom of conscience. And if you want a democracy, that's where a democracy has to start. It starts in the free thought of a free citizen. Now, once that thought generates an idea, the next thing you need in a democracy is the ability to articulate the idea. So it's no coincidence that the Free Speech Clause is 3rd. It comes after the 2 conscience clauses. So once you enunciate an idea in your free conscience, the Free Speech Clause allows you to speak. But speaking is not enough in a democracy. I hope I'm going to reach more people on this program than I will be able to speak to personally in my whole life. So that Madison realized that you need a 4th clause. And the 4th clause is a free press clause to be able to magnify your speech, amplify it, and allow it to reach a mass audience. And then he said, hey, after it reaches the mass audience, what's the next thing that democracy needs? Well, the next thing that democracy needs is the right to free collective action. Once you have a freely expressed idea that has been spoken under the speech clause, disseminated to a mass audience under the press clause, the next thing is to organize around it. And that's what freedom of assembly is. Freedom of assembly is the freedom to take collective action in support of a democratic idea. And it couldn't come anywhere else. It couldn't come before speech. It couldn't come before press, because you can't have collective action until you have mass dissemination of the idea. And then finally, after mass dissemination of the idea in the collective action clause, you then have the petition clause, which is the right to take that idea and bring it to the authorities, to the legislature, to the president, and require them to act on it one way or the other. So when you think about it, the First Amendment is a story of the life cycle of a democratic idea, beginning in the free conscience of a free citizen, freely articulated, disseminated in a mass basis, organized around through assembly, and finally presented to the government for petition. And every single word is exactly where it should be. And if only we would read it as this wonderful poem to democracy, there's no way that we could read the First Amendment the way the Supreme Court does today, to essentially let the super rich control democracy. What the Supreme Court has done is torn the free speech clause out of the heart of the First Amendment itself and used it as a mechanism to say money equals speech. Therefore, any amount of spending is protected by the First Amendment, even if it completely undercuts the ability to have a fair, robust, egalitarian democracy. And so what the court has done is it's turned the First Amendment from being democracy's best friend, which is what Madison was trying to create, and has turned it into a bad parent. It's turned it into the free speech clause polices democracy. It disciplines democracy. It prevents democracy from working, even when the law itself is designed to allow democracy to work. And my hope is that if people take a look at my book, if they're persuaded that there is a story, a wonderful poem in that 45 words, that they will realize that you have to construe the amendment as democracy's enabling force, the thing that makes democracy work, and not as some sort of device that makes it harder for democracy to work.
And I think one of the ways in which calling it a device used sometimes for personal or political gain is the way that free speech and the First Amendment have been misused colloquially in recent history. I'll give you a couple of examples that really represent this misuse or misunderstanding. One is there was this radio host, Dr. Laura, right? And she used the N-word 11 times on the radio while working for a private employer. Her audience was offended. She did not renew her contract and said she had to go elsewhere to regain her free speech First Amendment rights. This, to me, epitomizes such a fundamental misunderstanding of what we're talking about. It doesn't involve the government, first of all. And number two, correct me if I'm wrong, freedom of speech, even when we talk about the government as the sort of arbiter of whether you have that freedom or not, freedom of speech does not guarantee immunity from the consequences of that speech, based on my reading. You tell me if you disagree.
Well, no, sure, of course, David, that's right. I mean, what the current Supreme Court has done, and what a lot of people do, is they completely ignore the fact that there are all 45 words in the First Amendment. They take the 10 words of the Free Speech Clause, which says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. So they then take the freedom of out, because after all, the freedom of doesn't have any literal meaning. What does the freedom of mean? It means what we say it means. It's a man-made concept, and somebody has to decide it. So they throw that away because that gives you a headache. It's too hard to think about. And then what they wind up doing is saying what the Free Speech Clause says is Congress shall make no law abridging speech. And then you get a radio host like that who says, well, it says Congress shall make no law abridging speech. Somebody abridged my speech, therefore something terrible happened. But that's not what the Free Speech Clause says. First of all, it says the freedom of speech, which means that you don't have a right to threaten people. You don't have a right to extort money. You don't have a right to engage in false advertising. There are limits because it was not part of the freedom of speech. And then they ignore the fact that hearers have rights too. The reason we protect free speech is because of the dignity of the individual. We think that everybody's dignity means that they should be able to express themselves. And I agree with that. I didn't serve as legal director of the ACLU because I didn't believe in the dignity of everyone to express themselves. But I think hearers have dignity too. And targets, the people that the speech is about, they have dignity also.
Well, along those lines, I'm curious what you would think of, with all the discussion now of so-called religious freedom bills. What happens when you have conflicting religious freedom? For example, if you have Christians refusing to serve Muslims because the Christian believes that his religious freedom allows him to turn away whoever has religious beliefs they disagree with, but the Muslim also may be discriminated against based on their religious beliefs. What are the limits of that?
Well, David, that's an important perception because this isn't new. I remember when I was a young civil rights lawyer working in the South in the 60s, one of the arguments that the segregationists made was that they had a religious right to refuse service to blacks. and that it was therefore a violation of their religious rights to say that blacks had a right to come into the store or to the amusement park or to rent from a landlord, and we overrode that. We said that's ridiculous. Nobody has a First Amendment right to treat someone else unequally, because the fact is your freedom of religion stops at the point that you use your religion to shift real costs to a third person. And that's because the Establishment Clause is there. The reason the First Amendment starts with the Establishment Clause is that Madison realized that there should be freedom from religion. You cannot ask the government to take your religious beliefs and pound them into somebody else. So that you cannot ask the government to say that you have a right to say that you won't serve gays, or that you won't serve blacks, or that you won't serve Muslims, or that you won't serve Jews. If you open up a place of public accommodations and there's a law that says you have to serve everybody equally, there's no religious defense to that law. Because the moment there is a religious defense to that law, what you wind up with is saying that you can ask the government to impose a defense on a third person and make that third person bear the costs of your religious belief. The Free Exercise Clause is all about enjoying the free exercise of religion when it doesn't shift the cost to anyone else, when you bear the costs yourself. But you don't have a right under the First Amendment to run around and use the religion clauses as a club to beat someone else and say, I can make you endure the costs of my religious freedom.
Well, it's very clear, particularly given what is going on in the last few weeks. Very important discussion. There's so much more to talk about, and we will have to do it next time we have you on. We've been speaking with Burt Newborn. I'll remind you, the book is Madison's Music on Reading the First Amendment. Could not recommend it more highly. So relevant today. Thanks so much for being on with us.
Thank you, David. I enjoyed it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is April, and we have new jobs numbers from March. The expected new job number was 245,000 new jobs in March. The U.S. economy created only about half of that number, 126,000 new jobs. Some of the reasons for the lower than expected job creation numbers: weak consumer spending, stagnant corporate profits, and bad weather. This is the worst report since December of 2013. The broader context, though, is a very long and sustained continued increase in jobs, month after month, for many, many years. It's really interesting to note that these are the numbers most comparable to December of 2013. Remember what was happening in December of 2013. Republicans trying to shut down the government, default on the national debt, and send the country off of a fiscal cliff. And before March 15th, we had a 14-month streak of creating over 200,000 net jobs per month. The unemployment rate steady, 5.5%. Let me remind everybody that Mitt Romney promised to get the unemployment rate down to 6% by the end of his first term, which would have been January of 2017. It would have also, according to Mitt, required the repeal of Obamacare. President Obama getting the unemployment rate below 6% years earlier than Romney promised to do, obviously without repealing Obamacare. But here's the thing I really want to focus on today. Remember that when the numbers are good, the employment numbers are good, the right-wingers say that they're fake. The numbers have been doctored. They're the same numbers from the Congressional Budget Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that every president gets. But when they're good for Obama, the numbers have been doctored. When they're so-so, all of a sudden these numbers are real, Lewis, and we should base our full analysis of how terribly President Obama is doing on these numbers, which when they're better, we don't trust at all because Obama is coercing the organization.
Yeah, what are they saying? That the job creation situation has always been bad under Obama, but They like to focus on this month. Because
Obama's only able to get to the BLS certain months. If he's too busy to bribe them, then we get the real numbers, which are still good, just not as good as expected.
I see. That's what's going on here. I don't even see the point in focusing on jobs if you are trying to, hurt the Democrats at all here. There are plenty of other things to focus on. The job market doesn't seem to be one of them.
Yeah, but Lewis, the things to focus on that the Democrats are doing wrong are the things that they're doing wrong in the exact same way that the Republicans are doing wrong. So I don't know that they really want to call attention to those things.
Well, you can still call attention to them and just blame it all on the Democrats.
right? Pretend you're not part of it.
Yeah, that's what the Democrats do too when with certain issues with regard to Republicans.
It's basically impossible to have reasonable discussions with right-wingers about this now. If you want proof of that, check out the interview I did with Josh Bernstein, where he didn't even understand like the most basic economic terms and measures. So it was impossible to even have a conversation. And the double standard on believing the numbers is just so pathetic. It's incredible. It's stunning, really. A man of God, a presumed man of God, had his gun go off in church during an Easter celebration. It was Easter over the weekend. It was also Passover. And actually, I have some Seder stories for the bonus show. A report from WTAE says that a gun went off about 11 p.m. Saturday at the Cathedral of the Blessed Sacrament in Altoona, Blair County, Pennsylvania. Jason Wagler was sitting with his fiancée at Mass and heard a gunshot. He said, quote, "We were standing for a few minutes and just before the final procession started, the gunshot went off." Is that a normal thing on Easter, Lewis? People go to church really late at night?
I wish I could tell you, but I've been in a church maybe 2 or 3 times while there's an actual ceremony of some sort going on. So I don't know.
All right, Lewis, very much the wrong person to ask about this. Police say a man had a gun in his pocket and that it discharged when he stood up. The bullet grazed the man's hand. It reportedly had the safety turned off. Because the best way to prove that you're a Christian is to use Jesus as your life's model, and that involves bringing deadly weapons to church on Easter and not putting the safety on.
Freedom, Jesus, church, and Easter. I think that's actually why the eggs are hidden, is because so that people can't shoot them.
Yeah, all of a sudden, everybody with guns in church would want to use them as target practice, right?
Exactly. So I think, safety first.
An Altoona newspaper reported that the trigger of the gun caught on the man's pants, and of course the gun safety was not on, so it fired and grazed him in the hand. He was taken to the hospital. Police haven't released his name. Police haven't released why he brought a gun to church. Police have not said whether he will be charged with anything. Remember, one person's accidental shooting should be the law's negligent discharge, but we never really hear about that because charges are rarely filed. If the gun's safety was not on, and that means that the gun had a safety, that to me is a negligent act, Lewis.
It is to me as well. And I think there should be some type of penalty. But, this type of thing happens every day. You have to have the freedom to be able to shoot yourself accidentally, David.
On Easter in church.
Of course, even more so.
I actually had one thought that might make this be interpreted differently. What if this man brought the gun to church to stand his ground against religious claims that were not evidence-based, which he expected to be said at the Easter ceremony?
Perhaps he thought that Jesus was going to come back again and he needed a gun to defend himself from zombie Jesus. I don't know. Maybe that's insensitive, but I'm sorry. I thought it was funny.
We have a voicemail number. It is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen to this voicemail.
Hey, David. I was just calling about the fact that you just interviewed David Ray Griffin about climate change. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but David Ray Griffin is one of the leading propagators of 9/11 conspiracy theories out there. He's been at it for many years. And my question to you guys is, did you know that? And, if you did you think that there was any sort of problem with kind of interviewing someone who has a track record of propagating pseudoscience like that?
We did know that David Ray Griffin was a 9/11 conspiracy theorist. We interviewed him about his book on climate change. This crossed my mind. I mean, I could have sandbagged the guy and gone into 9/11 stuff, but we didn't say that would be one of the topics. We never give out the questions, but we agree on what the general topics will be. The book on climate science is science and evidence-based, and it's really good, and it points out the financial conflicts and everything. So, yeah, I understand. I don't agree with just about anything the guy has said about 9/11, but the book on climate science, basically, the science stands up for itself, Louis. So that was my feeling about it.
Yeah, I think in this case, it was easy enough to separate the two. And yeah, we didn't need to get into any of that 9/11 stuff.
I mean, obviously you could say, how could someone who, can you really separate it? How could someone who believes that, who's someone who's capable of believing that, really be trusted on anything? I understand that point of view. The book is good. I don't agree with the guy on probably much else. On today's bonus show, I've got some great stories from my Passover Seders over the weekend. Story about Dianne Feinstein, who doesn't seem to know how the internet works in some ways. Blue Shield in California loses tax-exempt status. And an unemployment fine in Belarus. All of that today on the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership. And remember, coupon code APRIL1/2 gets you 50% off your first payment. I recommend getting a yearly membership to really save. APRIL1/2 is the coupon code.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.